I hope everyone is doing okay. This is one of those late night soapbox, me being an insomniac, not able to sleep, um, and being too much news for one person to get everything out that I want to get out. So I am up late tonight. One of the things I want to talk about that I saw earlier today had to do with David Sirota. David Sirota was being viciously attacked in various publications. And apparently he was trending on Twitter. He found it somewhat amusing. Excuse me, that it was trending on Twitter. If you don't know who David Sirota is a journalist, and he was picked by Bernie Sanders to be a strategist and a speechwriter. I like David Sirota. I've found his work to be, greatly needed in regards to our political discourse. Now, but nevertheless, they consider him an attack dog, and he got on people's bad side when he went out and just went into open secrets and exposed the amount of money that Beto was getting from oil and gas. Beto's for Green New Deal, despite the money he's getting from oil and gas. And despite being from Texas. But nevertheless, Beto's being attacked here. The Atlantic comes out with an article saying that Beto was a double agent, that Beto was working for the Sanders campaign for months while simultaneously attacking other Democrats. Essentially saying when he published information against Beto, it's because he was an operative, not because he just didn't particularly like Beto. This is demonstrably false. This is demonstrably false. For one, Bernie Sanders' campaign has called it false. The Atlantic reported that David Sirota has been secretly working with Bernie Sanders' campaign for months while also bashing Democrats. Bernie Sanders' campaign says that that's not true. Sirota informally started the campaign about a month ago. February 14th, David Sirota resigned his previous position. February 20th, David Sirota formally begins advising Bernie Sanders. On March, Sirota signs a letter formally becoming a speechwriter. Now that's one version of this. People who were associated with The Guardian make another point. Also, again, different timeline, but essentially saying the exact same thing. This is John Moulahan. John Moulahan is an editor at The Guardian. He comes out, he says, the Atlantic's piece on Sirota, if Isaac Dover, whatever his name is, had contacted us before publication, we could have corrected the reporting error in advance. The last piece by David Sirota for us was the end of December. The first discussion with Sanders was in mid-January. Whichever timeline you want to go by, both people are corroborating, give or take a month, that he wasn't working with Sanders while simultaneously, essentially being a journalist. The two didn't overlap. David Sirota may have a particular political perspective, and that perspective may have made him, let's say, dislike certain of the Democrats that were in the race that he believed weren't necessarily legit. He also may have a political preference because he is a human being that, regardless of what he writes as a journalist, is ensconced in a political climate in a 2020 election that is going to be hellish. Why wouldn't he have a political opinion? Why wouldn't he have somebody that he may want more than somebody else? Meaning he may just like Sanders. And fact of the matter is, it may be clear that he likes Sanders, in which case it makes all the sense in the world that Sanders would tap him. Not to mention they used to work together prior. So this argument that, his writings in the past, be it attacking other Democrats or being disparaging towards the Democratic Party, is in some way indicative of him having worked with Sanders' campaign, is utter nonsense. It's not that it's impossible for it to take place, it's that there's no there to it to even make the argument. How do you prove it? When the people and the elements that are involved in it are saying that it's not so. Meaning the people in the know are saying it's not so. If Isaac Dover, the person, staff writer at The Atlantic, would have contacted the editor at The Guardian, the editor at The Guardian would have told him that what you wrote in your article was not true. The sad part about this is Washington Post has picked this story up full bore and has ran with it, and has essentially wrote an article saying that a Bernie pick was a double agent, was writing articles while simultaneously working for the Sanders campaign. Now, the Washington Post, of course, is not going to fact check this. The Washington Post is probably not even going to make a correction on this, seeing as this story is not true. The Washington Post, who's, if I'm not mistaken, owned by Jeff Bezos, or Jeff Bezos has a controlling share, and Bernie Sanders has attacked savage Jeff Bezos, getting so much so that, you know, Jeff Bezos ups the salary to $15 an hour. And let's be honest, if Bernie Sanders gets elected, Amazon is not going to be able to skate without paying any money for taxes. So, being the establishment's voice piece, I don't necessarily expect the Washington Post to have a favorable opinion of Bernie Sanders, nor do I expect them to go out of the way to do things like, you know, fact check shit that they write. The Atlantic, however, was the one that started the story, so I'm going with this idea that the Atlantic has written a hit piece on David Sirota that was factually, demonstrably untrue. Just saying. It's sad, but this seems like it's going to be the way for the next 2 years. I'll end this here. What's going on, Trudy? He's going to be opposition research guy, but in a defensive way, opposition research for Bernie to get ahead of the mudslingers. I like David Sirota. And fact of the matter is, it shows that Bernie is surrounding himself with people that are where he would hold his shape. David Sirota has not necessarily been... He's a lefty. The stuff that he writes is from the perspective of a lefty. I like the fact that Sanders is surrounding himself with lefties. I think that's a good sign. And Bernie was smart to hire a former opposition researcher. He's going to need it. This is not... I know lefties have a tendency to be overly moralistic. And what do you mean overly moralistic? How do you be overly moralistic? We don't have an ideal system. This is not an ideal world. And this not being an ideal world, people who try to stick to an ideal standard become Ned Stark. They get their head chopped off. There has to be some eye towards this idea that A, you may be cheated, A, people may be doing things that not necessarily cheating, but is not necessarily on the up and up, and maybe trying to undermine your campaign because they're trying to win themselves. And if you can't necessarily win on the positive, well, winning on the negative is time, time and true. It would be insane to run this campaign as if it will be an ideal campaign. It will not be. You will need those people for opposition research. It's not necessarily that you want them. And going negative on people is not necessarily the way you may want to run a campaign. And for the Democratic primary, it's unclear if they've signed some kind of pledge that they want to attack other Democrats in the race. But however you spend your money, the guy that's doing opposition research is a famed and valuable guy. And by the way, the opposition research, that's not something you even need to leak. I mean, media and the goal of trying to become president or trying to become anything from the standpoint of politics is an aspect of the battleground. They're not a thing unto themselves. They're part of the game space. They're included in the game space when stories are leaked, when a source goes to a reporter. Each reporter has their own sources within the various campaigns, people who would talk to them, that would help them release stories into the wild. Those stories are not just being released on their own. Things have to be put in the hands of reporters in order for those reporters to get that information. We don't have the journalists snooping like talking about anymore. We have information that's released, essentially stenographers. So the media is not a separate entity within the game space to which we find ourselves, regardless to all their protestations otherwise. I'm going to end this here. If you guys enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all.